Hello, my name is Sin Bagley, and I'm reading a story from New Romantics called Wildest Dreams. This was written by Alex Tellez, who's a friend of mine, and he gave me permission to read this to you. So let's get started. Wildest Dreams. He said, "Let's get out of this town. Drive out of the city, away from the crowds." Something about what he said got me so excited, it was like I could never say no to him. When I didn't say anything, he said, "I want to go into the woods tonight." "Why?" "Are you going to come or not?" His quick reply let me know that he was getting irritated. I had my reservations when we first met. He's one of those people that you knew would hurt you in one way or another. He'd been my co-worker for a year before he finally noticed me. He was a little older than me and much more advanced. In terms of my career, I was only out of college for 2 years, and I was still working my way off of the bottom ring of the corporate ladder. My mom would have freaked out on me if she knew what I was doing. I knew I couldn't tell her. He was so tall and handsome as hell. What can I say? I'm a girl with average tastes. I knew that he was a tough guy that hid an inner core, and I couldn't help but look for it. I was a girl that always hid from others in high school out of embarrassment. I never put anything up in my locker, and sometimes I would just sit on the grass and read during lunch in order to stay away from everyone else. To be honest, at this point in my life, I had never even been with a guy, but I was ready, and I was a lot better in the looks and personality department than I used to be. Many guys, post-college, were turned off by my apparent virginity. I never understood how they knew, but every time we were about to go there, they stopped. Of course, I tried to develop something beforehand, and maybe that was part of the problem. I wanted it to be somewhat special after all. Doesn't everyone? The difference with this guy was that my innocence, something which I tried to hide under vulgar jokes and fake laughs, was something that actually attracted him to me. He was a guy that would pick on me about my gut, white forest on my upper lip at a work birthday party, or laugh that hearty deep laugh whenever I stumbled or failed to realize how awkward I was. In the beginning, things were easy. Topics never got too serious. But whenever I tried to go somewhere a little deeper with him, he would stop talking. Sometimes he would even walk away. In contrast, he asked me all about myself, and for some reason I couldn't help but spew my guts. I guess the fact that someone was interested enough to ask mesmerized me. I spent hours talking about how I was bullied in high school, how I failed my third quarter of college because of a breakup with my first boyfriend, and how I longed for crazy adventures in other countries filled with one-night stands with guys I would meet in them. "Most girls aren't as careful as you," he once told me. I was thrown off by the statement because I always felt that I messed up constantly. I asked him what he meant, but he simply ignored my question and walked away just like he always did at that point. One night after researching dating tips, I figured out that I needed to let him come to me. It was very difficult, but I went a whole 2 weeks without saying a word. It was after those 2 weeks that he finally called me and asked me to go into the woods. We got into his car and he drove out of the city a little too fast. I'd never ridden in his car before, and something about the whole thing made my head spin. The city lights flew by in the windows of his car, and my head was throbbing from the couple shots of vodka I took before he showed up at my apartment. As we drove away from everyone else, in the silence, my excitement turned into fear. Was this the night that it was going to happen? Part of me didn't feel ready for any of this, even though I'd spent so many nights begging for my first time to be over with. When we got to the woods, he pulled to the side of the road and stopped the car. It was 11:10 at this point, and we were far enough from the city for the stars to be visible. The forest was so still and I was so quiet, but up until that moment, I never felt more alive. The scent of dirt and pine filled my lungs, and my heart raced. He took my hand and led me to his trunk, where he pulled out a blanket and laid it on the ground. It was so dark, but the moon made just enough light for me to see the plaid design of the blanket. He laid down and motioned for me to do the same. When I did, he pulled me close to him and held me in his arms. His body was warm, and the alcohol had faded enough for me to have chills from his touch. I'd never been this close to him before. I wanted to say something, but there was an invisible presence keeping me quiet. I felt like if I said something, I would ruin the moment. Oftentimes, I find myself, he started, I was hanging on to every word, unable to state how I feel. I think I held my breath. I think that we should be together. My heart pounded with each word. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. In what way? I asked. I sat up. What do you mean? He asked. He furrowed his brow. Oh, no, I've said too much, I thought. I hesitated and then said, never mind. What were you saying? I was saying I think we should be together. I was dying to say yes and dive into him, but a deeper part of me made its way to the surface. I found myself speaking, almost involuntarily. I will, but you have to tell me that you'll remember me just in case we don't work out. We don't have to talk about. I know, but I need to hear it. His mouth was open for a second, and then he closed it and nodded. I'll remember you. For the rest of our time in the woods that night, he pointed out the constellations in the sky with one arm, while the other one was wrapped around me. From there, we were together, but we had to keep it a secret because our work did not allow inter-coworker relationships. The whole thing was so exciting to me, the way we would kiss in broom closets or how he would slap my ass after lunch. I was thrilled. One night, he was in my apartment and he was listening to another one of my stories about my past. And I started to feel like he was getting tired of listening to me. I stopped this mid-story and he asked me why. I just felt like I was getting boring, he said. I'm sorry. Don't apologize, he said. I'm still listening. Keep going. Okay, but can I ask you one question? Sure. One of his arms was behind me and the other was hanging off the edge of the couch. Why do you care so much? I bit my lip and looked away, embarrassed by my own question. Why do you ask questions like this? He took a frustrated breath. Why can't you just enjoy it? I stared at his lips. I don't know. My breath got shallow. I've never been so attracted to him. It was so strong that parts of me were starting to shake. I said, no one has to know what we do. His hands were in my hair. His clothes were in my room. This moment was everything I wanted it to be. The lights were dim, which hid my teary eyes. Each kiss was ripped from the other, like taking off a sticker. His arms wrapped around me and mine wrapped around him, and we went to my bed together, again and again and again. Throughout those months, he opened up to me like a flower. He smiled, he laughed, he even teared up on occasion, but by the same token, I began to close up, because throughout all of those early months, there was something that I never told him, something that I was never able to accept myself. I decided to tell him after his birthday. He had a big party with most of his friends on his actual birthday, but I didn't go. I just saw pictures of it. He turned 30, so it was a pretty big deal. There was a huge cake, and it took place in a bar. Some girl from work threw it for him. In one of the pictures, her arm was around his shoulder. I'm thinking you should quit so we won't have to hide it anymore, he smiled as he looked away. I smiled. Oh, I don't know, I said. I'm not sure if I'm ready for something like that. I knew I needed to tell him something. But when he was sitting there in front of me, next to the small cake I baked for him, with that smile on his face, a smile like a child, I knew I couldn't. I knew that the only way to spare him was to get him to leave me. He cut the cake. He looked at me with a raised eyebrow. You know, I would take care of you, right? Yes, I know. I looked down at the floor and bit my lip. When I didn't say anything else, he grabbed me and kissed me. I'm your rock. You can come to me for anything. He smiled. I smiled. Nothing lasts forever. I know, but this was getting really good. I couldn't end it yet. I had to keep it going for a while longer. Throughout the next few weeks, we spent more time talking about our future. He wondered what color eyes our kids would have, where we would end up living together, and how big our house was going to be. He talked about how happy we would be for our entire lives. When he spoke about our future, he would paint the prettiest of pictures, a life filled with adventure and happiness. We would honeymoon in Africa and see the lions and zebras. Once we had kids, we would settle down into our life together and have the snowy holidays by the fire and summers at the beach where the kids would bury him in the sand. He said we would send our kids away in the best colleges and we would grow old together, but we'd never stop living. We'd spend our old age kayaking through the Congo. He said we would be the couple that others looked at with jealousy and joy. After he was done talking about our future, we would lie down and his hands would point out the stars as we laid underneath them at our spot in the woods. In the next 2 months, I did everything I could to drive him away, but he never left me. I started expressing feelings of jealousy over the girl at work, the one that threw his party. I swore he was cheating on me. He told me that I was just sabotaging myself like I used to when I was younger. I couldn't believe that he knew things about me that even I didn't know. I grew more temperamental, stressed and bitchy, but still he loved me. He wouldn't let me go no matter how hard I tried. I picked fights with him on everything from politics to what channel we would watch. I did my best to think of all the times he insulted me, and I threw him in his face. When he would look at me with those sad eyes, I remember the days when he used to tease me, but he didn't anymore. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand why this had to be so hard. I didn't understand why everything in my life had to be so hard. I spent some nights crying in his arms, but I still couldn't explain to him why. He never even asked. Things continued like this until one night when my gums wouldn't stop bleeding during a fight. He stopped me and asked me what was going on. It was then that I finally told him, I have stage 4 lymphoma, and I'm not going to make it. I fell into him and he pulled away. How could you not tell me? He yelled at the top of his lungs. Because, I said, nothing could be more painful than you leaving me because of the truth. And that's exactly what happened. After he was gone, the disease started to progress faster. My mom wanted me to go on chemo so I could live as long as possible. I quit my job, but it wasn't so I could be with him. It was so because I couldn't work anymore. My mom looked after me, and she never even knew about him. I lost my hair, my lips grew pale, and I got weaker and weaker every day. Some nights when I fell asleep, I would dream of him. I would see the life he laid out before us in crystal clarity, piece by piece. One night I dreamed of our trip to the Congo. We had kayaked during the day, and we were lying on the grass staring up at the stars. He held my wrinkled hand, and I held his, and he explained all of the different constellations south of the equator. Another night I dreamt of our children playing in the snow. They were twins, a boy and a girl, both with dark hair and blue eyes, wearing Santa hats. He was putting up the Christmas lights, and I was telling him to be careful on the ladder. I was standing in my scarf, hat, and mittens. I held my hands over my stomach, expecting another child soon. The worst night I had a dream about our honeymoon in Africa. I was wearing shades and safari gear, and I was smiling. After seeing all the animals, we went back to where we were staying and made our way to the bed. We talked about how much time we had ahead of us and how excited we were to have each other. He kissed me, and I woke up. There were so many dreams of both the past and of the future, and every time I woke up, I would cry into my sheets in silent screams. I would retch over and over at the thought of never seeing him again. My heart felt like shards of broken glass grinding in my chest. I wondered if he felt the same pain I did. I wondered if he dreamt of me at night. I wondered if he wanted to see me again, but just couldn't. Over time, my illness progressed to the point that I have had tubes coming out of me in every direction. The doctors let me know that I am living on borrowed time, and that instead of having months ahead of me, I now have weeks. My mom visits me every day, and there are still those moments when there's no one else in here. The dreams don't haunt me as much anymore, but my mind still thinks of him whenever everything gets quiet. Sometimes, when I sit alone in my hospital bed, I like to think that he doesn't think of me as the girl that I became. I'll never forget the first day he noticed me. It was at a company picnic that was set on a cliff right next to the ocean. A breeze flew over the picnic the whole time, but it wasn't too strong. I wore this beautiful black dress. I was trying on red lipsticks for the first time, and I was slightly embarrassed by the way that I looked, because I wasn't used to having to dress so formally. I was too afraid to talk to anyone, so I remember just staring out into the sunset above the waves. He walked up behind me and stood there for a moment. I crossed my arms behind my back, and I looked towards him, and then at the ground. My cheeks turned rosy red. He looked at me, and then the sunset, and just told me how beautiful it was. Then he walked away. I hope that's the girl he remembers when I'm gone. And that's the end of the story. Thank you so much, Alex. This was very beautiful.